welcome everyone. Excited to be here and excited to talk about the Dremio MCP server. So I'm Aniket Kulkarni. I'm software architect at Dremio, focused on our AI, focused AI roadmap. And as you can, as you all would have heard everywhere else, this whole space is abuzz with various different things. We are experiencing an AI or agentic AI boom in some sense, and one of the new entrants making a lot of waves here is MCP, or the Model Context Protocol. And before getting into the details of how we are using it to complement Dremio, let me give you a quick primer on what it is and how is it supposed to be used. MCP protocol is, in some sense, the USB-C of agentic interfaces. So, in other words, if I wanted to have an AI agent which is doing a lot of my workflows, and let's say I wanted to congratulate my sales executive who has had the most success in Q1 and give them some swag. Then with MCP, I can actually split this complex task up for the agent into 4 different parts. You can have an MCP server that allows the agent to understand the sales metrics, another to understand the HR metrics, and finally a couple more to look at and integrate the aspects of announcement and swag store. Putting all of this together, the AI agent can actually easily break this down into things that the LLM can understand and actually work on what I have told it in natural language. And this portion is exactly what I want to do a deep dive in today. So we are pleased to announce the Dremio MCP server. This is a complete open source implementation of the MCP protocol targeted specifically towards Dremio, but not limited to it. As you can see, it allows you to get quickly off the block and integrate your agent, or even just your desktop LLM, your Claude desktop, for example, and turn that into your Dremio assistant and just start interacting with Dremio. All the while, it will still allow you to add and complement other non-Dremio things along with this to have a better workflow on your side, just like my account executive and swag example from the slide before. So with this, let's actually take a peek under the covers. What is MCP and what is the Dremio MCP server? So the current version, the current release of the MCP server is what is called as a local MCP server. I'll get into towards the end of my presentation and demos. I'll get into what the next steps are and what non-local would mean. But let's at least start with the simpler case where local MCP is a MCP server that is running right adjacent to your LLM front end. Now, let's talk about some nomenclature over here. So an LLM front end is the actual interface, the actual entity that that takes your input and then renders or presents results or responses from your LLM, right? So, for example, you think about Claude or ChatGPT and any other things. The desktop versions of that are the front end for that LLM. Or obviously, you can develop your own custom front end and then hook it to either self-hosted or self-hosted LLMs like Llama, Mistral, or have it in the cloud like Anthropic's Claude, OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google Gemini, and so on. And the front end is what you interact with natural language, and the front end serves as a conduit between what the LLM wants to do and any other tool that is there to help it, to augment what it can do. And MCP server standardizes these tools, makes it extremely easy to develop and actually plug these tools into any of these LLMs, because the protocol is a standard, very simple JSON RPC based protocol. Now, one thing to note that at an API level, both Claude and ChatGPT, as well as a few others, actually support MCP. At a front-end level, right now, Claude is the only major, fully featured front end. So with Claude Desktop, you can immediately start interacting with the MCP server, and that's what I'll use in today's demos to actually show how you can deputize it to be your assistant, to be your intelligent assistant for Dremio, and to make your workflows that much better. So now let's take one more step under the covers. So we talked a whole lot about the protocol. We have heard about it. I'm sure you all must have as well, about various different servers. But what is it that this server supports? And then let's take a look at how to actually set it up and play around with it. So from the Dremio standpoint, every MCP server will support a bunch of tools, a bunch of prompts at the minimum, and there are a few other optional things that they can support. But for the purposes of this discussion, and for all practical purposes, it's usually the prompt and the tools that are important. So what is a prompt? So prompt is usually the context / instructions / background that is sent or shared by the MCP server with the LLM, so that when you start asking the questions, this is something that is shared before you start asking the questions, so that when you, the end user, starts asking the questions, LLM knows what context this is being asked in and how to answer it. And then the other thing that it shares and automatically registers is tools. Tools are things that the LLM would logically want to do, but it can't do on its own, so it will call the tools. For example, it might want to know what data sources related to a conversation that the user is having. Let's say the account executive, the sales stores that the account executive was doing, related to that. What are the sources and what are the tables within those sources? That's what a tool really does for it, right? So from a support standpoint, the MCP server supports both Dremio software and Dremio cloud. The communication happens pretty much exclusively on REST APIs. It does not need to communicate over JDBC or legacy JDBC or even the new ones or Flight. To begin with, the first release uses PAT authentication for Dremio, and there is support for external OAuth authentication on Dremio Cloud. I have a short demo for that. We'll get into it, as well as how this will evolve as we go ahead. Now for the important part, the tool support. So I would categorize Dremio MCP server's tools into 4 different parts. You have explorative tools, introspective tools, and then tools that can extend to non-Dremio systems to complement, and then finally extensibility, so that you can add your own tool. And that was one of our motivations in making this open source, so that to encourage more contributions. So you can think of explorative is what you think of in when a agentic example comes to mind. Hey, what are the patterns in my data? What data sets do I have access to? Can you figure out who sold the most? Who sold the most last quarter? Find trends quarter over quarter, things like that, right? So it, in some sense, is parts of business intelligence tools that traditional business intelligence tools, but in a agentic and more of a conversational manner. Introspective is actually taking that and saying, hey, let's apply it to myself. Let's ask Dremio to analyze itself and look at workload that I have been running on it, patterns of that, failure patterns. Is there something that I need to right size, or is there something that I need to be aware of by looking at my history and so on? And an example of extensive tools would be let's say I have on my Dremio software, on my Dremio Kubernetes software deployment, I also have deployed, for example, a observability stack, a Prometheus observability stack. Now, if this tool allows you to even hook that into the same MCP server, which means the LLM has more context at its fingertips, and it can use each of these to actually make better decisions. Now, before we get into those demos, let's actually look at how do we even go ahead and set this up. Let's do a getting started demo. So the easiest way to get started is to use GitHub. Clone the GitHub directory. As I mentioned, it is totally open source. And in this case, I'm just showing a quick clone to your terminal, clone the directory, and it is there. All these instructions are a part of the README, and really the only prerequisite over here is Python. And as you will see over here, the UV Python package manager. That's all that you need to get started. Now, to do the initial setup, I'll go to my Dremio instance. I have a Dremio instance here, and I will go ahead and generate a personal access token, a PAT. I'll do it. I'll copy it. I'm going to use it for myself in this case. So this is my token, and it gets installed in my server. As I said, this is a local server in this release, so I'm using it 1:1. Just so that I don't share it in this video recording, I have just copied it directly to a file on my local workstation, and then the Dremio server config command is a good shorthand to set this up quickly and without getting into the actual specifics of the config file and so on. The gory details of that are already in the README, are already in the documentation markdown files in the GitHub directory. But as you can see, just adding this set up the configuration as well as it installed all the Python dependencies and any other packages that were necessary. The second command here is just creating default Claude desktop configuration, which hooks up the server that we just cloned to Claude. Now I have just spun up Claude desktop. And if you go and look at it, it shows that Dremio is installed, and all the tools as well as the system prompt is now installed in that. So with that getting started, we are now at a stage that we can just start running. And at this point, it is Claude is deputized to be our assistant, and we can just start asking it various kinds of questions. Before I get into a bit more detailed demo of what I can do with such an assistant at my fingertips, let's take a look at what are the tools that I'd mentioned a few slides earlier. I had mentioned a few categories of tools. Explorative tools are the most generic. So running a SQL query, because LLMs are pretty good, really good actually, at reasoning SQL queries from conversations or from questions and cues that you give it. Being able to run a read-only query to begin with, and of the LLM's choice is actually a good tool. And as you can see in the demo after that, LLMs are also good at figuring out if the query wasn't right and correcting the query. Let's say there was a syntax error, it would be able to go back and correct it itself. So this gives you a flavor of how the tools are developed and what the tools do. So this the run SQL query, and then there are a bunch of other tools which actually tie the semantic layer, Dremio semantic layer, into this ability so that the LLM can get better information. So as the name suggests, and as you can see, it is around the schema, the descriptions, labels, and tying these together in a hierarchy that makes sense. So for example, you have a source which has a bunch of folders which have a bunch of tables. Being able to know that, oh, there is a description that might have been entered, a wiki that might have been created for the table as a part of your semantic layer transformation. Let's say you have a DBT pipeline that was creating these layers and you have comments. some comments were applied at the folder level or maybe the source level, saying that this source is for this category of your data, and then you have some tags or comments or description at one of the table levels. The tools like get description of table or schema will actually tie this hierarchy together, because that is what the LLM is good at. So if you actually present it with the information of a table schema and the description of the table, as well as any description within this hierarchy that makes sense, it is extremely good at reasoning the right information or the right context from that, so that it can run a better query to continue the analysis or exploration that you are asking of it. So this is how it will complement. This is how it actually complements the LLM, and we'll see a pretty good and detailed demo of that right in a couple slides. The next one is Introspective, which is now turning Dremio around to itself and saying, hey, help me understand my job failure patterns as well as my job usage patterns. So making sure that the LLM knows what are the tables, the system tables that store job history, what is the way to get failed jobs, and having it put those two things together so that we can figure out trends from that is extremely useful. Finally, another thing that is useful for introspection, especially for Dremio Cloud, is figuring out a usage. What is my project usage? Can I group my projects by engines and say how much usage or how much DCUs am I consuming, but having and putting it all together. And then if we put the context of these three things together and give it to an LLM, that makes it that much more powerful in responding to some of the questions that I had asked at the beginning of these slides. So with that, let me get into a demo. So this is a demo that a slightly long demo that I have that I had recorded earlier, and I'll play it and I'll describe what we are seeing as we go along. So here, the problem statement, or what I wanted to do was, as a part of this new release, I wanted to look at the anonymized product telemetry data that we have, and understand what should be some of the new default configurations for some of the in our help charts for some of the things, like, let's say, coordinator memory or executor configurations, and so on. In order to find this new these new ones, typically I would have gone to some of my colleagues who are actually in charge of maintaining the anonymized data in our internal data lake, so to speak, but they were unavailable. So I thought, hey, what if I actually used what I was just talking about, Claude and the MCP server, to do the exploration myself. Anyways, that's what I've been talking about so far in the past two slides. So here, I've set up the MCP server as I showed in the prior video. And then the system prompt is the context, like I said. And finally, what I asked it is, hey, list the tables containing metrics for customer clusters that obviously I have access to. And off it goes. As you see over here, it will obviously ask if my acknowledgement, if I'm okay running these tools that it has discovered from the MCP server. But now, as you see, it has started to run queries. It has started to figure out what the queries are. It was running some queries on the information schema table. That's the basic thing, and then it is looking at the results that it comes back. And as you can see, it already saw some table names that seem similar. The description or the name seems similar to the question that I'm asking. Then it is digging in further. So this is exactly what a database assistant would look like. I mean, here I am describing what it is doing, but I don't have to do any of this while it is doing. It is not only reasoning what I asked, but it is looking at the results and then fine-tuning what it had reasoned about in the first place, and it is also looking at some of the tables and sample data from that, because the system prompt that I mentioned up above has already told it that before you finalize your inference, before you finalize anything, take a look at the sample data and confirm that your hypothesis is correct. So after this, it at the end of about 3 minutes into its work, it has figured out there are some tables that does these tables, like in the business and the business schema and the preparation schema and so on, they do seem relevant to what I was asking. So in this case, I can just ask back. It seems that namespace support looks interesting. Can you actually dig deeper just into that and see if you can get closer to the question that I'd asked first? And then off it goes. It will do its stuff, and let's speed it along just in the interest of time. So this video is also shared along with the rest of the videos in this webinar. But as you can see here, it has now zoomed in and found out things about certain tables that look to be memory related or infrastructure related, like max heap by cluster in buckets, and so on. And because it was able to, because the MCP server told it to sample some data, it sampled some amount of data, and it can actually say, yes, these tables do contain this information. Not only that, it can tell that the tables contain deployment types, like Kubernetes versus non-Kubernetes in software, and so on. And it is also able to differentiate between places where you have just diagnostic information, which may not be useful, and what I am interested in. So now I can ask it to dig it further and say, look at the overall spread of memory for coordinators and executors, and don't just give me the answer. You can. It would be better if you can present that visually. It is going ahead, and it is actually doing lots and lots of joins. I've also told it that use anonymization, so we'll let it do its thing. I'll just speed it up just a little bit so that we can actually see what it is able to find out. So at this point, it has gotten its inference. Now it is working on figuring out a visualization so that I don't need to do that like like an effective assistant over here. So let's let it go through, and it has generated a bunch of code for visualization, and there we go. So it now has a visualization pre-prepared for me, right, based on this. So this is great. This gives me a spread. This gives me a lot of information, as well as insights by organization and so on, even over version numbers. That's great. Now, this was all great. Before I conclude the demo, I wanted to tell it, I don't want to keep doing this over and over again. So now that you have done it, can you actually create data products? Can you actually create clear views for this, so that the next time around, be it a human or be it the assistant use case, they can just get to those views really quick. Now, for the purposes of this demo, I have only enabled select queries, as in no DML query, so it won't be able to create views. So at this point, what it decided to do is it decided to just create the views, the SQL for me, and let me go ahead and run the query myself, because I had disabled DML. So here it has created about 10 views or so. Where it has explanations, it has descriptions of these views. Everything is ready, and all I have to do is I'll go there, copy paste the views right here, and I'm off. So not only did I get the answer to my questions, I got a visualization, and I got to leverage the semantic layer, not just for the getting this information quickly, but also got data products that I can put back into the semantic layer so that it is I don't have to keep doing this again, and this is good for posterity. So with this, let me show you one more quick demo, which is we just talked about exploration. Now, here's the thing about introspection. So if I start the MCP server with introspection enabled, it adds the introspective tools along with the explorative tools that we just talked about. So in this case, I asked it a simple question: analyze the workload for the past week and tell me if there are any patterns. Is there anything, any failure pattern that I need to look at, that I need to worry about? So this is just data about Dremio itself, and it decided to go ahead, look at, in this case, this was a Dremio cloud system, so it could also build a usage report and then use it to look at the overall workload. So it did that. Then it looked at the jobs recent table to begin with. It was doing an analysis for the past week, as I said, and it now has enough information. So it's just going ahead and trying to create the visualization. So let me just speed it along a little bit. So if I speed it along, let it do its thing, and that's it. And there we go. So yeah, it is showing me fail versus cancel jobs. It is showing who are the folks who are doing a lot of these failed jobs, and so that way I can zoom in to those folks and figure out why it is happening that way. All right. So with that, let's what we just looked at, what we just demoed, is more of the bread and butter part of the MCP server with Dremio. Now, now let's take a look at the extensible tools, which is the ability to actually integrate and associate an observability stack, like a Prometheus observability stack, if you have it, with Dremio, with the Dremio MCP server. In the config file, there is a section where you can add which you can point to a Prometheus server if it has been collecting metrics from your cluster. And I did mean extensive here, not introspective. So this is not applicable for DC because DC doesn't have a Prometheus stack in your VPC, in the customer VPC. But in software, especially on Kubernetes software, there are several cases where we have seen customers have Prometheus observability stack. So with that, we can actually complement what we just looked at, the demo that we just looked at, in interesting ways. So here's a demo on how I can use Prometheus to complement my assistant case. So in this case, in this case, I just wanted to, I have a bunch of test clusters, and I wanted to understand if I can figure out, I know that these clusters are Kubernetes-based software deployments, but I wanted to figure out if the spread of what kind of Kubernetes provider they are using, maybe AKS, maybe EKS, maybe something else, because I have a spread of all of these, right? So because I had an observability stack, Prometheus-based observability stack, I just asked it, hey, figure out if there is a way, just looking at those Prometheus metrics, can you find something out? It started looking at and exploring some of the metrics that are available, and especially the labels of the metrics. And then it found out that, oh, it looks like the node name label is a part of some of the metrics, especially the jobs total metric. Okay, then that's a good rubric to use to answer the original question. So so then it figured out what pattern would apply to what kind. It also figured out that if it is not the public EKS the public Kubernetes providers like AKS and EKS, self-managed Kubernetes typically have different names, and it figured out that pattern as well. And it provided this information to me. Now, a visual at a glance is always better. So just asking the assistant to plot it for me, just goes ahead and creates a plot from the same information. As always, I'll just speed it up a little bit. All right, so it now has the information, and it will just go ahead and do the plot for us. Almost there. And it already had the first plot, and it realized that, oh, there is, it could be a distribution plot as well as a group by plot. So it is now doing the distribution plot. So once that is done, we can actually take a look at the end result. Right. All right. So, and there we go. It just gave us a full distribution, and at a glance, I got the answer to my question. Right. Now, we looked at how extensive, how the extending tools helps complement the core tools that are Dremio specific in the MCP server. But the MCP server is set up such that you can also add your own. Sometimes things, sometimes you can think of things that are more useful to your own workflow. That was one of the main reasons in open sourcing this tool, and this is just extending this class, as I mentioned over here, and you will find this information even in the documentation in our open source flow. But just extending this class and implementing this method is enough to just add your own tool to that. It's just reducing some amount of boilerplate, but that's all. And therefore, we really encourage contributions, discussions, fork the repo, and start exploring. Put your own contributions. We'll be really happy for that. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the next steps. I had mentioned at the very beginning of the call that this server runs local, as in it's on the same location that your LLM front end is running, and Claude is the fully featured, major LLM front end that supports this. We are using Dremio Access, personal access token, as I showed. So this is really suited for a one-on-one end user assistant interaction with Claude, which is what all these demos have been showing you. But it also supports OAuth, as in you don't need to actually get your pad, but at least in Dremio Cloud, which supports registering OAuth applications. So which basically means you just register a one-time OAuth application client ID once, and then if you use that or if any of your users use that ID in the Dremio MCP server config, then Claude itself will redirect the end users to their respective logins to their Dremio environment, and then you don't actually need to manage packs because yes, packs come with some management penalty, so you don't need to do that. Now, finally, in the last 2 weeks, there has been some amount of standardization and some amount of movement on remote hosting. As you know, MCP is a very as popular as it is. It's a very young specification. It actually started. The first draft spec was put out last November. So it is still evolving rapidly, actually. So one of the key things that are evolving and getting added is support for authentication. So we are considering on our roadmap, we are considering when and how to support the ability to remote host that Anthropic is now pushing. For example, Claude integration support, which is available for the Claude Pro and Enterprise subscriptions, allows Claude.ai, which is the online LLM front end, to actually integrate and authenticate with a remote and a remotely hosted MCP that is available on the internet. And there are several such things that are up and coming in this in this area. So that is something that we are keeping a close eye on, and we will consider it in our roadmap as well. So with that, let me show you the last demo of the day, which is around the OAuth capability that the MCP server supports in DC. So here I have a Dremio cloud environment where if I go to OAuth applications, I can just add an OAuth application, fill in a name. The redirect URI is simply localhost. So as you can see, it's just HTTP localhost, some name, and you have the client ID. At that point, I can just open up the config and put in client ID and project ID. So the project ID is if you have more than one projects on Dremio Cloud, then this is the non-default one if you wanted to. Now, if you saw, let me just take this back a little bit. At this point, when Claude was started up, it immediately redirected, Claude itself redirected you to your Dremio login page. So the end user, in this case me, could directly log on to Dremio. It completes the authentication, and then that's it. There is no PAT involved, and at this point, Claude is ready and is authenticated with the relevant temporary token, and it's all set. With that, the last point I wanted to cover in today's session was custom frontend. So we have been in all the demos, and so far we have been talking about Claude Desktop, because that, as I said, is one of the only major LLM frontends that are supporting this protocol in its entirety. So so there has been a lot of interest in what if I am developing my own frontend, or in some cases I need to use a locally hosted LLM, let's say a Llama, let's say local Mistral, or any of the OpenLlama or LLMs, OpenLlama supported OLlama supported LLMs. Then I can't use the front ends that come with, let's say, Claude or ChatGPT when it supports it, right? So then does that mean the MCP server is of no use? Well, actually not. If you are developing your own front end for any of these reasons, MCP is supported in the framework. In fact, I have two different examples that we have open sourced in the Dremio AI framework directory. One is using LangChain to integrate with this MCP server. The other is BAI framework, which also supports, it supports MCP directly, and it can integrate with the MCP server, which means you don't have a front end. This framework integration allows you to integrate this into your front end, whatever you might be developing, if you are not using things like Claude as your interface to, or as your agent interface. All right. So with that, we come to the end of this discussion,